Well, thank you for taking some time. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
I have this theory that I've developed over the years of so many people that are in the music industry are in it because of a passion for music. And I know this is the case for you. I wonder, did you have a lot of music in your house when you were growing up?
Yes. My father was an opera singer and a cantor. And he was always singing. And I heard it from childhood. And that's the background.
And how did it develop in you? What was your first instrument?
The guitar. And the way this happened is I wanted to follow in my father's footsteps and become a singer. So when I was old enough, I went to the best voice teacher in Tel Aviv, where we were living at the time, and I started taking lessons. So after 6 months of training, the teacher told me, you know, you have a beautiful voice, you have a great future in the opera, on one condition: you have to learn to sing in tune. so I said, how do I do that? He said, we'll learn to play an instrument. Which one? The violin, of course. So I had very little money in those days, only about $5 in my pocket, £5. So I went to a music store and I said I'd like to buy a violin for £5. He says, we don't have a violin for £5. What do you have for £5? We have a guitar. So they sold me a guitar for £5 and I got stuck with it ever since.
What did your father think of you bringing the guitar home?
Well, by that time he was really not around anymore, so I'm sure he would not have liked it at all.
What was his career like?
Well, he was a man of all trades. He was a writer, Bible researcher, linguist, so forth. And when he needed some money, he would go to the synagogue and sing and be a cantor on the high holidays. That's how he supported us mostly.
Wow,
Yeah.
very interesting.
Besides, he was a chess master. And it's the one trait I didn't never learn from him. I know the moves, but that's about it.
And where did you grow up?
First of all, I grew up in Palestine. That's where I was born. Because when I was born in Jerusalem, it was still Palestine. Then it became Israel. And then I grew up and I lived there until I was 28 years old, and then I left and came to the States. And I've been an American ever since.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Have you gone back there?
Oh, I go back every year. I still have a large family there. Yeah.
Very interesting, yeah. So tell me a little bit about how your own career and music interest developed.
Well, when I became a guitarist, I was young, I was very good looking, if I should say so myself, and I was a very good guitarist. I really very good, and I speak absolutely objectively. But I had this really bad habit. I like to eat 3 times a day, every day. So that did not work out too good in the early 60s with guitar music. So I had to take another job. And I spent my life flying airplanes commercially. I was a pilot in the Israeli Air Force before that. So I supported myself and my family by being a commercial pilot and doing music on the side. And when the time come to, a flying career eventually comes to an end, and I started my publishing business. And eventually I retired from aviation and I'm doing music full time.
That's fantastic. So where did the idea of the publishing company come from?
It's like this. I was doing a lot of chamber music concerts with other people. And very soon I realized that there was really not a lot of repertoire available for chamber music with guitar. So I started looking around and I found some music that people did not know very much about. And I can give you the short version of the story or the long version. The long version is about 5 hours.
Okay.
So this will be the short version.
How much tape do we have, Alex?
Anyway, to make a long story short, I found one piece of music that I really liked very much, and I wanted to play it. So and what I got was an old, late 18th century manuscript by Luigi Boccherini. It was a sinfonia with guitar as a member of the orchestra. And I wanted very much to play this and to make it available. So the first thing, I prepared an edition by hand, writing out, making corrections and so forth and so on. And I found a publisher. Amazingly, they accepted my proposition and even announced it in the newspapers that they will publish my edition of the Boccherini Sinfonia and so on and such a date. A year and a half later, I got from them a pink slip. So I said to myself, it took them a year and a half to tell me no. Why couldn't they say this right away? So I said to him, you know what? I'm going to do it myself. And I got into, of course, I never published that symphony. I published a lot of other things. The first thing I did was a trio for violin, viola, and guitar by Beethoven that I found. And I did this was in the late 70s. And from then on, I've been doing it for 35 years. Yeah.
That's crazy. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So tell me about your approach of, first of all, how do you pick the pieces that you would like to publish, and then for what instruments do you choose?
Well, my main instrument is the classical guitar. When I say the main instruments, when I publish solo music, it's usually for solo classical guitar. I did publish some music for lute, some ancient manuscripts in facsimile, in transcription, and I do a lot of chamber music that usually includes the guitar as one of the instruments. Yeah, that's my main interest. Yeah.
And what about choosing the pieces?
Choosing the pieces, this is a process that's usually I follow my nose, you see, and once I established myself as a publisher with a reputation worldwide of very good quality, I get proposals by composers and by wannabe editors that I should publish their music. And I used to get them at the rate of about 4 or 5 a week, you know. And I did publish a couple of those, but mostly it's something, you know, it was not even worthwhile reading through. You can say, read the first through line and you realize what you've got. So today, I can boast of having the world's largest collection of unpublishable music. Yeah. And sometimes, you know, I also do a lot of contemporary music by composers who I like very much. There's several, mostly American, and some Europeans, and I feel very lucky when they offer stuff to me, these particular people. Yep. As far as early 19th century manuscripts, there's music. I concentrate on the music of 2 French composers. One of them I discovered. His name was François de Fossa, and I discovered his full biography and his music already 35 years ago, and today you hear his music all over the world, and it's being performed and recorded. And I try to keep, to publish his complete available works. Yeah.
So when you say you discovered them, were any of his pieces already published?
No.
None.
None.
Wow.
So that was in the late 70s. I discovered something very strange. I was living in Concord, New Hampshire at the time. And when I got the microfilm for that symphony I mentioned to you, I didn't know what to do with it. It's a microfilm. So people ask me, I saw, what do you do? I cannot read it, you know, it's hardly visible. So, you know, there's a machine, it's called a microfilm reader. So where can I find one? In a local library. Okay? So I went to the local library, you know, Concord, New Hampshire. Have you been there?
Yeah.
It's a small town. And I asked the librarian, do you have a microfilm reader? He says, no. So I says, where can I find one? So we go to the state library. State library where they keep all the proceedings of the New Hampshire Senate and the local newspapers and so forth. So I go to the state library across the street. I go to the reference librarian, and I'm about to ask her about the microfilm reader when I see behind her a cabinet for a card catalog cabinet. On top of it, it says music. And I knew the lady. I said, Cora, what is this behind you? She turns around. She says, you know, I've never seen this before. So I said, what do you mean? They put it in this morning? No, I've been sitting at this desk for 27 years, and for 27 years it's been there, but I never noticed it said music. So I said, do you mind if I look? So I looked. Apparently it was a collection of music somebody donated to the state of New Hampshire in the 20s. And it's been sitting there all these years, nobody ever looked at it. And I found this guitar music by a guy I never heard the name of. And I look at it and I see this one piece of music that I know. I don't know his name, but I know it as a piece by somebody else. And I started to figure out who did it first, who stole from whom. Was this De Fossa, or was it the great Francisco Tárrega, who is considered the father of the modern guitar? Apparently, I later found out that De Fossa died 3 years before Tárrega was born. So, and that's how I got involved, and then I found a lot of information about him, a lot of music by him in many libraries over the world. I found his birth certificate, his death certificate, and so forth. And I even found his portrait in color.
So,
I can actually show it to you if you...
Sure. What was his life? When was he born?
He was born in 1775.
Ah.
That's him.
Okay. Wow, how did you discover the photo? Or the painting?
That's another 5 hours.
Oh, that's great.
I found all these documents in the archives in Perpignan, you know? And apparently he was a military person who was doing music on the side. And they told me that they got these documents from a great-great-granddaughter of his in Marseille. Ah. So, you have a phone number? Yes. I called her up. Madame de Fossa? She said, oui. You know, it's like Mrs. Beethoven. Jawohl. So I explained to her who I was. I'm an American, and I'm interested in the history of this ancestor of hers who was a composer. So she said, no, we never had any composers in our life. They were all military people. So I said, but do you mind anyway if I come? So I came, and she said, but I don't have much time today because the bathroom is leaking, and the landlord promised to come and fix it, and my son is going to come and talk to the landlord. I don't have time for you. But give me 5 minutes. And she did. I walk into an apartment, and there's this picture hanging on a wall. So I said, who's this? He said, I don't know. Do you mind if I take a photo of it? I did. And then I went back home and did some research. And I was able to identify the medals in the portrait. Ah. Okay? But still, I did not know, it could have been anybody, you know. And then luckily, a friend of mine knew a person in New York called Vladimir Tarasyuk, who used to be the curator of military uniforms at the Hermitage Museum in Leningrad. So I took the picture to him and I asked him, who is this? So he says, this is a lieutenant colonel from the French Army, 1815-1820, 23rd Regiment. Well, I knew that it was the 23rd Regiment because it was so described on one of the editions. So I asked him, how do you know it's the 23rd Regiment? He says, the buttons on the tunic has a number, the number of the regiment. And that's how I established that this was my man.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That is very interesting.
Yeah.
What else did you discover about him?
About him? That he was responsible personally to the Boccherini guitar quintets that we all play from all over. The only known manuscript is in his handwriting. And I published a book about that in 1981 already. And pretty much his entire biography. In the French Army, the wars, he participated in the time he spent in Mexico before, just after the French Revolution, because he was a nobleman, so he kind of liked to keep his head on the shoulders. You know what they did in those days. So he fled to Spain and joined the Spanish army, went to Mexico, spent several years there, and came back and eventually ended up in the French army when the French left Spain in 1813. Yeah. Very interesting man.
Yeah, sounds like it. And from the pieces that you published, what has struck you about his composing abilities?
Well, you see, he was a man who did not depend on publishing for his livelihood. He was a professional military person with fairly high rank, and I have a feeling that he actually paid for the publication of his own music. And because he was not bound by commercial considerations, he was free to compose. And as far as I'm concerned, and this has been verified by several well-known musicologists, the level of compositional skill the man had was far ahead of his time for the early 19th century. Very high quality. At one point he was called Haydn of the guitar. Yeah, yeah.
That's fantastic, yeah.
And this is only one of several people that I discovered over the last 35 years. Yeah.
That is amazing. Are there others that you're particularly proud of?
Yes. I'm proud of, not of one composer, but of one work of this composer. The man's name is Giulio Regondi. And he was very famous in the early 19th century as a child performer. He was already performing concerts on the guitar when he was 6 years old, you know? And I discovered in Russia, of all places, a set of 10 etudes by him that nobody knew anything about. And I discovered it because I read Russian and I speak Russian and I read Russian magazines from the turn of the 20th century in which this was mentioned. So I figured out if a Russian magazine in 1904 speaks about 10 etudes of Regondi, they have to be in Russia. And it took a long time. Eventually I found them. And they were first published in 1989, I believe. And since then, I must have sold 10,000 copies. You know, it's one of the most successful publications, and everybody plays them all over the world. Yeah.
That's incredible. To back up just a little bit, when did your publishing company start?
1978.
Oh, 78.
Yeah. In Concord, New Hampshire. Then I moved to Boston for a while and settled up in Columbus, Ohio. And the reason we ended up in Columbus, of all places, called Cowtown, is because my wife is a musicologist, and she got a position at Ohio State University. And like a good husband, I followed her to Columbus, and we've been there ever since. Yeah. She's a specialist in Russian music. She's Russian by origin. And she's writing books on Stravinsky, on Shostakovich, and inviting to lecture all over the world about these two composers and Russian folk music and so forth. And that's how we ended up in Columbus.
And how did you come up with the name of the publishing company?
That's a very unfortunate accident. You see, I started in Concord, New Hampshire, and I was living in a 19th century mansion. No, actually later than that. It was early 20th century. Big 19th Victorian building was locally known as the Castle. And it was in the corner of School and Liberty Streets. So I had this brilliant idea. I'm going to call my publishing house the Castle at School and Liberty Streets, which spells Casals. Because one of the very first things I was going to publish was an edition of the Bach cello suites for cello with Casals fingering. That never happened because some legal problems, and I finally decided, but that was the main idea. But then I mentioned it to a friend of mine in New York, who was very influential, director of the Guitar Review at the time, Vladimir Bobry. And he said, you can't do that, Casals. You're a guitar publisher, right? So what is it? Your name is Ophee, O-P-H-E-E. Why don't you make it Ophee, which is the French version of Orpheus God on Music? It's a bilingual pun, and I thought it was a good idea, and I accepted it, and I regret it ever since. Because now everybody calls me Monsieur Ophee. So I have to explain to them the name of the company is different than my name. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, fun. And so tell me a little bit about what when you first started the publishing company, what were some of the challenges that you had at the
First challenge number one was music engraving. Because I started in 1978, and the only place I knew where to find engravers was in New York. There was a whole caste, even a trade union of music engravers, and they were charging $40 a page. And I simply could not afford that much. But somebody mentioned to me that there were Korean engravers in Korea that were doing it for $9 a page. So what is the address, name? Nobody will tell me. I said, every publisher that I approached, I said, no, we can't tell you that. That's a guarded. I actually went to the Korean embassy in Washington, trade attaché. Can you find me a name of the Korean engraver? No. Eventually, there was one fellow who knew, and he wanted something for me in return in a legal suit, you know. So I said, I'll help you out in a legal suit if you give me the address of the Korean engraver. And he did, and that's how I started. Wow. Yeah, I started, and I did, then I did some engraving in Hungary. This is Soviet Hungary. Until about 1989, when I started doing computer engraving. And ever since, I do only by computer. And that was the main challenge at the beginning. The second challenge was to sell. You know, I started to do my own selling. There was no internet, there was no website, but there was printing paper catalogs and assembling mailing lists and sending out mailings and so forth. And over the years, it's been growing.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And so, how did you market your publications?
As I said at the beginning, I used to put advertisements and do mailing lists. So they would mail out paper, mailing lists, several thousand names, 2-3 times a year. And eventually I ended up with getting myself a distributor. And that's what all my sales are doing now. I don't do any sales myself anymore. And my distributor is the Theodore Presser Company. I'm sure you've heard of them.
I'm sure have.
And they are my distributor, and they do everything for me. Yeah.
Wow, that's really neat. How
Yeah.
did you get involved with them?
They got involved with me because we were in one trade show. We happened to have they had a table next to mine, and the guy was running it, the sales manager. He saw what I was doing. He said, "Well, I want that," and he made me an offer. And I said, "No, that's not good enough. No, I'll do it myself. Don't worry about it." 10 years later, I had an office building in downtown Columbus, where I had my office and I had employees and a storeroom and all that. And the college across the street bought the building and was going to turn it into a parking lot. And they gave me 6 months to move out. And I did not feel like moving the whole thing because I was tired of employees. You have 3 employees and you have to fill out 7 income tax returns every 3 months, you know. And it was a little too much for me. So I decided to move back home. Got rid of the employees, called the man at Presser, says, "Remember me?" Said, "Yes." "Are you still interested?" "Yes." And that's how we got started. So instead of moving the stock to the house, I put it on the truck and sent it to Presser. And we've been in business ever since. Yeah.
That's great. So did you work with Arnold Broyle over there?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Good friend of mine to this day.
Ah.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me about
Not Arnold, his son, Tom.
Tom. Yeah.
Tom Broider. Tom was one of the persons who helped me most. The man was a treasure of knowledge that was incredible. And I was really sorry when he had to leave the company, when they changed hands.
Yeah, I just recently met Tom for the first time. Great guy.
A great guy.
Yeah.
I can tell you a few of the jokes that he used to tell, but they're not for for public.
Yeah, I was told he was a bit of a prankster.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
he still is a good guy.
Yeah.
You know, he's on my Facebook.
Ah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Now it's a whole different set of people there, since Presser merged with Carl Fisher, but still very, very cooperative, nice people. Yeah.
Yeah, that's neat. And so at this point, you had mentioned earlier that are you thinking about retiring or?
Yes. I retired once before from the airline. And since I retired from the airline, I never worked so hard as I do now, because never a day off, never call in sick. Vacation is something, and to be frank, I'm 80 years old. And I can see the writing on the wall. The end is coming. I don't know when. Tomorrow, in 20 years, who knows, you know? But what my main interest is that what I've established in 35 years remains and continues. And that's why I would like to find somebody who will take it off my hands and continue it. Of course, I have no intentions of stopping the work I'm doing. I will continue to work with that person and continue to do what I do best, is produce high quality editions. Yeah. But to deal with the accounting and post office and sales and all that, I really have no interest in that anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot to juggle. It's a lot to juggle.
It's a lot, and I'm one man. My wife is too busy with her scholarly work on Stravinsky. She's not involved in my business. Except she is involved in my business. She's a person who can read a musical score like you and I read a newspaper. You know, it's amazing. So when I about to publish something new, I always ask her, what do you think? She looks at it and says yes or no.
That's good.
So she helps me out a great deal in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you two meet?
Oh, but you ask all the questions require five. You see, I started being interested in the history of the guitar in Russia. Okay, I did not know the language very well because my father, who's from Russia, never spoke it to me, but he used to speak it to his friends. So I had the sound of the language. So I decided to take lessons because I realized that all the literature on the guitar in Russia is in Russian. There's nothing in English, nothing in any language. So I decided to take Russian lessons. I was living in Boston at the time. So I took 6 months private lessons from this Russian lady, and after 6 months she tells me, you need some conversation practice. So with whom should I practice conversation? You know, there's this young musicologist just came from Leningrad, and she's looking to have some practice in talking English. So once you two meet and exchange practice. So we did. And we've been practicing ever since. Every day. That's going on 30 years now.
Is that right?
So if you come to our house and you say, watch us talk, it's funny because we talk both Russian and English at the same time. Yeah. Of course, I must admit that her English turned out to be much better than my Russian because, you know, she's been teaching at Ohio State for many years and giving lectures all over the world and writing in English, and my Russian is conversational mainly.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. And like I was mentioning to you earlier, one of the thoughts I have is that we seem like we're sort of in flux right now.
Yeah.
And it's very unclear to me what the new generation, the younger generation, are going to use for their music.
You see, some publishers are going into electronic publishing, and they produce for sale electronic files that you can put on your iPad and so forth. Personally, I don't do that. I can do it. It's really a simple technical consideration to do, but I don't do it. I just don't like it. I prefer a nice printed edition. Would people prefer the other kind eventually and put print music out of business? Maybe, I don't know. But personally, I'm not interested in that. If that is the end, then I'm out of this business.
I was going to ask you also, I mean, one of the changes that occurred during your time as a publisher was, as you had mentioned earlier, from the hand-tapped procedure to the computerized. What did you see that process? I mean, I'm assuming that the early days of the computer weren't very good, but eventually got better. How did you view that?
The main advantage, for me at least, of a computer file is that it is susceptible to 100% editing of every single item. When I get a plate of music, when I used to get a plate of music from Korea and it contained mistakes, I had two choices. Either send it back and ask him to correct the mistakes, which will take about 6 months, or make the corrections myself with Letraset. You remember Letraset? Letraset was a kind of transparent sheets that you press and contain letters and symbols. And you know what I'm talking about? You ever seen those?
Yeah.
It's called Letraset. Or made the corrections with Letraset, which really looked bad. I still have some editions which I corrected with Letraset, and I can see. I hope nobody can see how sloppy that was. With computers, I have, particularly the program I'm using, you can correct everything and do it now, not in 6 months' time. I'll give you an example. One of my Korean engravers, they were very good, but I needed a page of music that needed the page turn at bar 73. So I wrote on the manuscript, please make sure that page turn occurs on bar 73. Okay, and I get the engraving, okay, and it indeed corrects, and right in the middle of the page there's a typeset in very good letters. Please make sure that the engraving ends at bar 73. Very nice typesetting. So that was easy, you know. With whiteout, I could scratch that out. But you were talking Korean. I don't speak Korean. I have no idea. But that.
They did what you asked them to do.
Huh?
They did what you asked them to do.
Exactly. They did precisely. But I. And there were several other. And Hungarians were not any better, you know. They were really intellectuals, and they spoke German, you know, and I could explain to them what I want, but they had their own ideas. So there's quite a few stories about that. Yeah? So when I finally got into computers and I could do it myself, I said, wow, that's really a big change. Yeah. So now when there is a mistake, I made it. I'm responsible. Yeah. Yeah.
And have you used the same computer program?
Yes. This is a very old computer program that was started at Stanford University for mainframe computers and eventually ported to the PC. XT computers. I don't know if you're old enough to remember those.
Yeah.
You are. On XT computers in DOS. Okay, it's a DOS program, and I'm using it to this day in DOS.
Oh, in DOS.
Yeah, and it's, of course, on the screen, it's not WYSIWYG, like everybody is interested. It's not. But you learn to understand what the symbols on the screen means in relation to the output. And for me, what's important is not how it looks on the screen, but how it looks in the output, you know? And to this day, there is no, as far as I'm concerned, there's no other program that is as good as Score from a graphic excellence point of view. I've won several Paul Revere Awards for graphic excellence from the Music Publisher Association over the years, exactly for editions produced in the Score program.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Have you been involved with that organization?
With?
The MPA?
I'm a member,
Yeah.
you know, but I pay my dues, and but I was not really involved. I went a couple of times to their annual meetings, and but I'm not really involved. And if they ask me for something, I would, but they haven't.
And how about the NAMM show? It seems to me that you said you went.
I went to NAMM once, and in Mannheim. Mannheim? Anaheim. Mannheim. I'm in Germany. I'm getting confused. Anaheim. I went once in Chicago, and I went once in Anaheim, and in both cases, I really suffered from the noise. It was so loud and so, I just could not stay there, you know, and I wanted to see what's going on. Here at least, the section for publishers is segregated from the section of music, or all the trumpets and the drums and things. So at least it's perfectly quiet and I can see what interests me. At the NAMM that I've been, I don't know how it is now because it's been about 10 years since my last visit. At the time, the publishers and things, the guitar makers and all that, were at the same place as all the rock and roll and loud amplifiers, and I just couldn't take it. So I actually left in the middle of the day and I went home. Yeah. So if you tell me that it's time to come back, I will.
Well, maybe you could start out slow and go to the summer show where there's a lot less guitars and drums. I don't know.
In the summer show. But is it all mixed in the same hall?
Well, this is a new year this time, so I don't know the answer to that yet. I heard that there might be segregation, but I don't know.
If there's segregation, let me know, you know, and I will come.
Yeah.
I'd love to go. You know, because I know a lot of the people, you know, the guitar makers, guitar players, and I'm not exactly much of a buyer of instruments or sheet music, but I'd like to see what's going on.
Yeah.
That's very important. I've been coming here for the last 25 years, almost every year. Wow. Because Chanterelle used to be my distributor in Germany, the person I'm hanging. So he used to be my distributor, so I would come and help him out. Now, of course, he sold out, and I have another distributor. Now it's MDS, which is part of the Schott company. Now that's my German distributor now, because they work with Theodor Presser. Yeah.
And how are things going as far as that? The distribution of your products?
I have no complaints. I wish they would distribute more. But everything is fairly smooth. You know, I get paid on time, and I have no complaints. I think they know what they're doing. Yeah.
Well, it's a great catalog. You've assembled some amazing things. It's been fun to see that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the contemporary. We didn't really talk too much about some of the contemporary people.
Well, I do. There's several contemporary composers who are good friends of mine, and I like very much their music. One particular one that I'm very fond of is a fellow who lives in New Orleans, Carlos Barrientos, who is from Honduras, but grew up in New Orleans, and he writes absolutely first-class music. And whenever he has something, I publish it. Yeah?
That's fantastic. So are you going to still do this for a while?
What's that?
Are you still interested in doing this for a while?
I'm interested in doing what I do, preparing editions. I'm sure I will continue to do that. I'm not going to go fishing.
It's not for you, huh?
Not for me. I'm going to sit home and continue to do what I do, but I'd like somebody to take the company over.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will work for them. Yeah.
Well, I sure appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today.
Anytime.
Very
Thank you.
interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.